Jim, thank you very much for that kind introduction, and I'll take the applause when I can get it, I think, like Martin. And welcome everyone to the first back to school, 1st of September feeling that I certainly had this morning when I woke up. So congratulations one and all for making it out on the first Monday in September after the holidays. So our event tonight is looking at water and getting water onto the CEO's agenda. And we have a fantastic panel with us here in London, as well as Jim mentioned, a live link to Stockholm, to World Water Week. But just to set the agenda a little bit first, I'd like to talk about the efforts that are being made here and elsewhere to put water onto the strategic agenda for business, taking it away from the tactical and making it much more real. We know that water is emerging as a defining issue in the 21st century, and yet few CEOs seem to be able to factor this in, even though the risks might be acknowledged. So how do we move this? How do we get water experts to help us to move this onto the business agenda? So thank you all for coming tonight to help with this work and to learn from our panel. We know that earlier this week, for example, Coca-Cola had to abandon a $25 million plant in India due to excessive groundwater use. So that looks like it's beginning to be a strategic business issue. And we know from a number of different studies that water is rising up in importance. So for those of you that are familiar with the World Economic Forum Global Risks Report, water has made the top 3 risks every year for the last 3 years. And we know from the UN's recent World Water Development Report that 40% of the world population will be living in areas of severe water stress by 2050. But alongside these key pieces of information, the 2013 Global Compact CEO study found that only 14% of CEOs regard water as an important issue for business to address. So how do we get across that disconnect between our understanding that this is a huge risk, and yet for CEOs, they're somehow unable to make this an important issue for their businesses? Another very interesting insight from Coca-Cola came from Greg Koch, who's their Director of Water Stewardship. And this is a slightly different angle on water as an issue, where he says that Coca-Cola need an emotional license to water. And that on top of the regulatory permission, this emotional license is needed for them to operate, because water is, as well as essential for human life, it has a spiritual element, a religious element, and a visceral element, and we all need it every day. So that's that broader issue about water that's so important for us to consider. And why is there that disconnect? Are companies assuming, we had a conversation earlier on in the margins, is the assumption that somehow government will set in and will bail out the companies and will somehow solve the problem? Are we assuming that technology will fix it and there'll be some sort of silver bullet somewhere that will help us get through? What is it that's stopping this? So this evening we're going to talk about a number of things. We're going to look at the different forms of collaboration that are emerging across the sectors. We're going to think about some of the responses that have been developed already, like shadow pricing for water, and we're going to look at ways of assessing and managing those risks that we know are there, not just in the immediate day-to-day operations of companies, but deep, deep buried in their supply chains. And what's happening in the UK water industry? We're going to hear later on, how is that new competition, what impact is that going to have, and how will that affect the sustainability? And all of that hopefully will lead us to understand better what it is that CEOs can do and how they can work better with sustainability experts to put that front and centre on their agenda. So before we move to our panel, we're very fortunate to be able to have a live link up to Stockholm, to World Water Week there, and I'm hoping that we'll have Torje Holmgren online, who's the Executive Director of the Stockholm International Water Institute. So Torje, tell me you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us here in London this evening. Welcome very much. We're delighted that you're able to talk to us from World Water Week, and I gather that you're one of the founders and instigators for Stockholm World Water Week. So can you tell us some of your thinking behind the need to establish this and what you've noticed changing in the last few years in the attention and interest that the World Water Week is attracting?
Well, thanks for having me. What started in 1991 as the Stockholm Water Symposium, mainly gathered in scientific community around the world, has turned out to be the World Water Week, the annual leading global event on water, nowadays gathering not only scientific communities, but also governments, representatives from international organizations, civil society, and more private sector. So that is the most recent events we have seen over the last 5 years, an increased interest from the private sector.
Good. So that's what we need to hear for our event this evening here with CEOs. And why do you think that's changing? What are they coming forward to learn from you? What are you offering them?
I believe that the 3,000 participants starting today at the World Water Week in Stockholm will have some experience to share with each other. We have regulators, we have decision makers from different walks of life. And I think with the scarcity of water increasing around the world, we see from the private sector as well from the public sector, of course, also increased interest for how to use water more efficiently in the future.
Thank you. And is there a particular role for some of the investment community delegates who might be coming along to World Water Week?
Our experience at Stockholm International Water Institute over the last few years, that we have been approached by a number of industries, are engaged and have seen that water is a key ingredient in their supply chain. For instance, we started to work together with the Swedish textile industry a few years ago, setting up guidelines on use of water in the textile industry. That means that we have now started last year to implement in a number of suppliers in India that guidelines. And that has shown that the suppliers and the Swedish industry have started to gain not only decreased use of water, but also energy and chemicals, which immediately shows itself on the profit and loss account. So it's a gaining story.
That's very promising. So you're seeing that direct entry point now being translated into hard numbers, if you like.
Definitely. And what we realize is that starting with the textile, we are now also being approached in discussion with the pharmaceuticals industry, the forest, energy, as is the theme of this World Water Week, as well as the finance sector and insurance companies. So there is an increased interest, a huge interest, I would say, nowadays in water issues. And you mentioned yourself the survey by World Economic Forum putting water as one of the major risks in the future among world CEOs.
And can you tell us a little bit about your theme for this year? I understand it's water and energy.
Yes, that's right. And there are very close interconnections between water and energy. We need water for energy, for cooling, for hydropower, for biofuel, and energy for water, for pump, treat, and transport water. And they're very closely interconnected. And we do foresee, the estimations are that over the next 20 years, energy sector will be the main water user, going from 12% to some 25% of all fresh water used in the world. So those sectors are really closely interconnected.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. Before we leave you, do you have any key messages you'd like to give to our attendees this evening on their CEOs and getting water onto their agenda?
What we have discussed here is talking about the opening day, how we can make water efficiency be as common as energy efficiency. And we believe that water smart energy solutions will be part of the future, as well as how to use energy more smart in water use. So I think, to me, energy and water efficiency are the key words for the future.
Thank you very much, Tonje, and thank you for joining us.